At exactly 9:04 a.m., the door to Conference Room C closed with a click that sounded more like a verdict than an invitation. Diane Whitmore, 61, sat at the long glass table across from a man young enough to be her son, Miles Draper, the firm's freshly minted managing director. He wore that trademark corporate smile. All teeth, no warmth. "We've decided to restructure the client experience division," he began, adjusting the cuff of his $1,000 suit. "Today will be your last day, Diane." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Diane's back straightened, not from pride, but instinct, like a soldier recalling training. Her voice didn't waver. "I've been here for 27 years. And we're grateful for everything you've done," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "HR has prepared a transition package, 4 months' salary, benefits through December." "Grateful? Transition package?" Diane blinked slowly. This wasn't just a meeting. It was an execution masked as etiquette. "I built this department from a one-desk operation into a $60 million revenue stream," she said quietly. "You're severing me like I'm a redundancy line on a spreadsheet." Miles didn't flinch. "It's not personal, just business." But it was personal. The hallway outside felt narrower than usual, as Diane was led to her office to collect her things. She passed interns whose names she'd memorized, junior analysts she'd mentored, partners who had once come to her with client emergencies in the middle of the night. Now, no one met her eyes. In the solitude of her office, she packed slowly. Framed photos from charity galas with clients, her worn leather notebook filled with handwritten client preferences, and a silver clock gifted by the founding partner, now retired, on her 20th anniversary. Her phone buzzed. A single text. "Heard rumors. Call me ASAP. Joan M. Haven Biotech." Joan was their largest client. Diane exhaled, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. They didn't understand. "You can't spreadsheet trust. You can't promote loyalty through a memo. And you sure as hell can't replace 27 years of client relationships with a 20-something who knows PowerPoint, but not people." As she turned in her security badge, a question lingered. Not one of bitterness, but of reckoning. How did loyalty become a liability? If experience, trust, and loyalty can be dismissed in a 10-minute meeting, what does that say about the world we've built? And who gets to decide when someone's value has expired? 3 days later, the quiet of Diane's apartment felt heavier than usual. A muted autumn sun poured in through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. She sat in front of her laptop, the blinking cursor on a job search site like a pulse reminding her time was moving, but she wasn't. The landline rang, jarring in its rarity. "Diane, it's Joel. Joel Langston, the founder of Whitmore Langston Consulting, the man who'd hired her nearly 3 decades ago." "I just landed from Frankfurt," he said, his voice taut. "I just heard what happened. I did not sign off on this." Diane paused, measuring her tone. "Doesn't matter, it happened anyway." "While I was overseas, the board pushed the restructuring through as an emergency motion," Joel said, guilt bleeding into every word. "They cited urgent financial projections. I was deliberately kept out of the loop." She let out a long breath. "I was shown the door by a man who still asks how to pronounce our top client's name." "You deserved better," he said quietly. "I want to fix this." "You can't fix being told you're obsolete." "Miles never understood what you brought to this firm," Joel said. "And that's on me. I should have protected your seat." She didn't reply. What could she say? That loyalty had become a liability? That institutional knowledge no longer held weight in a firm chasing younger, cheaper labor? When she hung up, Diane checked her phone. Messages had flooded in. Texts, emails, even 2 voicemails. Joan from Haven Biotech. Marcus from Treadwell Logistics. The entire executive team from Mid-America Capital. Each message echoed the same thing: confusion, frustration, concern. And one critical sentiment: they didn't want to work with anyone but her. Later that night, a courier arrived at her door. The envelope he handed her bore the name Helena Morris, one of the most well-connected executive recruiters in Chicago's consulting world. Inside was a note, handwritten in precise, elegant script. Diane, word travels fast. You're the name on everyone's lips right now. I have 3 firms ready to meet. They're not just interested, they're preparing roles for you. Let's talk over dinner tomorrow. Helena. Diane stared at the letter. She hadn't reached out to anyone. She hadn't stirred trouble or whispered to clients. But relationships had a way of speaking for themselves. The next morning, her phone rang at 7:38 a.m. Diane, came Joan's voice, sharp, direct, familiar. Tell me this isn't true. I'm afraid it is. Well, Joan snapped, my contract with Whitmore Langston is up in 6 weeks. I don't care where you land, but wherever that is, we'll be following. Diane set the phone down slowly. Her hands were still, but her heart wasn't. For 27 years, she had nurtured these relationships not for leverage, but out of respect. Now they were lifting her back up. They said she was no longer cost-effective. But it turns out, in the world of business, people like Diane were the ones holding it together all along. By the time Diane stepped into the restaurant in Lincoln Park, Helena Morris was already seated, reviewing a slim portfolio while sipping chamomile tea. Her presence was magnetic, confident, clean lines, not a strand of her silver-streaked hair out of place. You're even more in demand than I thought, she said without preamble, closing the folder. 3 firms are requesting meetings. 2 are creating positions just for you. And frankly, Diane, they're not being subtle about it. Diane blinked, still adjusting to this alternate reality. Just last week, she'd been walked out of the only professional home she'd ever known with a cardboard box. Now people were talking about her like she was a free agent in a bidding war. Helena slid the portfolio across the table. Diane hesitated, then opened it. The first offer was from Ralston & Gray, a sleek West Coast consulting firm looking to expand east. The role: Executive Vice President of Client Strategy. Salary nearly double what she'd made before, plus profit sharing. The second, more traditional, was from Kingsley & Bell, solid, established, with clients in finance, law, and biotech. They wanted her to lead a new division focused on executive relationship management. Also generous. But it was the third that caught her breath. Everett Blackwell Group, a mid-size firm with a reputation for client-first philosophy. The position? Equity partner, head of client experience. The contract included full autonomy, executive decision-making power, and, most shockingly, a signing bonus that could pay off her mortgage twice over. Diane looked up. This is real? Helena nodded. They're not just buying your experience. They're buying your trust equity, your client list, your name. It was surreal. The very firm that discarded her as excess had underestimated how much of the business she was. And now, her reputation was carrying more weight in the industry than any marketing campaign ever could. She spent the next 4 days in meetings, across downtown Chicago and via Zoom with executive boards from all 3 firms. Some tried to impress her with analytics dashboards and culture decks. Others focused on flexibility, independence, and support. But Blackwell stood out. Their leadership listened more than they spoke. Their questions were thoughtful. Their energy reminded her of what Whitmore Langston had once been before the suits arrived with their spreadsheets and buzzwords. Meanwhile, the situation at her old firm was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Diane hadn't said a single negative word to a client, but she didn't need to. Clients talked. They shared stories at golf outings, on board retreats, through private Slack groups. When one of Diane's largest clients received a generic introduction email from a junior associate claiming to be their new point of contact, they forwarded it to her with a single line. Are they serious? By the end of the week, 6 major clients had requested meetings with Whitmore Langston's executive team to discuss continuity concerns. Two had already begun exploring other providers. On Friday evening, as Diane reviewed her notes from her Blackwell interview, her phone rang again. This time, it was Joel. "They're panicking," he said, skipping pleasantries. "The board wants answers. Investors are nervous. And Miles is spinning." "I'm not surprised. Are you going somewhere else?" Diane hesitated. "I'm weighing options." "Look, I know you're upset, rightfully so. But I'm asking, what would it take to bring you back?" "I already told you. It's not just about the job. It's what it represents. Miles made it clear I was no longer valuable." "I'll override him. I'll create a new position, Chief Relationship Officer. Partner-level compensation. Total autonomy. You report directly to me." It was tempting. If he had made that call a week ago, she might have said yes. But Diane had changed. "You're not really trying to save me, Joel," she said gently. "You're trying to save the firm. And I don't blame you. But I'm not your safety net anymore." The silence that followed was heavy, honest. That weekend, as the industry buzzed with rumors about Whitmore Langston's turmoil, Blackwell's offer letter arrived via courier, printed, embossed, and signed. Diane read it 3 times, then picked up a pen and wrote one sentence in return. "I accept under one condition. I bring the clients who choose to follow, and I build this division from scratch, my way." By Sunday night, 11 clients had reached out to her directly. Some were subtle, just checking in. Others were blunt. "We're leaving unless you tell us where you're going." She didn't chase them. She didn't ask. But when trust is broken, people follow the person, not the brand. And Diane had become a lighthouse in the storm they never saw coming. On Monday morning, Diane stood in front of her closet longer than usual. The navy pantsuit felt like armor, but she chose a deep emerald blouse instead. Something softer, but no less strong. She wasn't walking into battle today. She was walking into negotiation. By 8:45 a.m., she stepped out of the elevator into Whitmore Langston's marble lobby for the first time since her termination. The receptionist did a double take. "Ms. Whitmore, are you here for the meeting?" "I am," Diane replied, her voice calm. "Mr. Langston is expecting me." The executive boardroom was already packed when she entered. Partners had flown in from New York, San Francisco, and Dallas. Junior staff lined the walls. Joel stood at the head of the table, composed but visibly strained. Miles Draper, however, was nowhere to be seen. Joel began immediately. "Thank you all for being here. As you know, recent events have raised concerns with several of our key accounts." He gestured toward Diane. "I'm pleased to announce that Diane Whitmore has agreed to return as full equity partner to lead our newly formed client experience division." A hush fell over the room. Even from the far end of the table, Diane could feel the weight of every gaze. Hope, relief, and for some, fear. But she didn't move. "I appreciate the offer," she said, her tone measured. "But I'm not coming back to Whitmore Langston." Joel blinked, visibly confused. "But we agreed." "I agreed to attend this meeting," Diane corrected gently. "To observe, and to clarify something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a crisp folder. "I've accepted a partnership offer at Blackwell Consulting. As of this morning, they've finalized an agreement to acquire controlling interest in Whitmore Langston." Gasps spread across the room like a current. "The acquisition will begin next week," she continued. "Blackwell has assured me that institutional knowledge and long-standing client relationships will be preserved. There are no immediate plans for layoffs, unless, of course, they become necessary for efficiency." Joel sat down, stunned. "Diane, what have you done?" "I didn't do this, Joel. You did. When you allowed a numbers-driven executive to dismantle the very foundation you spent 30 years building." Whispers erupted behind her. Someone dropped a pen. Others stared, silent, stunned. "It's not revenge," Diane added. "It's realignment." The next day, the Chicago Tribune broke the headline. Blackwell acquires Whitmore Langston in industry-shaking move. Diane's name appeared just once, buried in the ninth paragraph. Diane Whitmore, former Senior Director of Client Relations, will oversee the integration of the client portfolio post-acquisition. But behind closed doors, Diane was everywhere. Integration meetings began that same week. She operated out of Blackwell's office, leading daily strategy sessions, reviewing personnel charts, and personally contacting the top 50 clients to ensure stability. She made it clear to the Blackwell team, the clients weren't just accounts, they were relationships, stories, history. Meanwhile, Whitmore Langston unraveled at a startling pace. Miles, desperate to save face, held an emergency town hall to address rumors. But the damage was done. Clients had already migrated. Employees were submitting resumes to Blackwell. Joel, after 3 days of silence, finally reached out. They met at a quiet corner cafe, far from the offices, far from the spotlight. "You orchestrated this," Joel said, sitting across from her, his face older than she remembered. "No," Diane replied. "I responded to it. I should have stopped him." "Yes," she agreed. "But you didn't. You let Miles call me legacy baggage," and said nothing. He looked down at his coffee. "And now?" She slid a document across the table. "Blackwell is offering you a 3-year advisory contract, no management authority, a chance to exit with grace. And if I refuse? Then you leave with nothing but your payout. This offer is goodwill, Joel. You might want to take it." He nodded slowly, defeated. "You really built it all back in just 6 weeks?" "No," she said. "I spent 27 years building it. The last 6 weeks were just proof." By the end of the quarter, the transition was nearly complete. Staff morale had stabilized. Client retention was at 94%. Revenues were climbing again. And Blackwell Franklin Consulting was the talk of the industry. From the corner office she never imagined having, Diane stared out over the city skyline. The firm that once discarded her had been absorbed into one that saw her as indispensable, and all she had done was stand still long enough for the truth to catch up. 6 months after the acquisition, Diane Whitmore's name no longer appeared in small print. She was now one of the most respected leaders in Chicago's consulting world, quietly powerful, highly sought after, and, perhaps most importantly, entirely at peace. The new signage on the 47th floor read Blackwell Franklin Consulting, a name born from merger, but also from survival. Not everyone had made it through the integration. Some had resigned. Others had been transitioned out. But Diane had fought to retain as much talent as possible, especially those who had been overlooked or pushed aside during the prior regime. Because she understood something the spreadsheets never did. People don't stay for a paycheck, they stay for purpose. Her new office, all glass and steel and sunlight, overlooked Lake Michigan, but she never let herself get too comfortable in it. Every week, she sat down with clients personally. Every month, she held town halls with her staff. She walked the floors. She answered emails herself. She still remembered the name of the intern who'd brought her coffee 6 months ago. At a quarterly leadership meeting, numbers confirmed what many suspected. Client retention, 96%. Revenue growth, 23% year over year. Employee satisfaction, highest in company history. And still, Diane never once said, "I told you so." That wasn't her style. On a Tuesday afternoon, her assistant knocked gently. "Ms. Winters is here for your lunch meeting." "Send her in," Diane said with a smile. Catherine Winters entered the room like she always did. Efficient, polished, and direct. CEO of Haven Biotech, she had been Diane's client for over a decade. And perhaps, more than that, a quiet ally during the storm. "You've built something impressive," Catherine said, setting down her handbag. "Frankly, it's the most elegant corporate transition I've seen in 20 years. "It wasn't a transition," Diane replied softly. "It was a correction." They both smiled at the truth in that. Over salad and iced tea, they talked business, upcoming FDA decisions, shifting healthcare policy, new AI-driven logistics. But as the plates were cleared, Catherine leaned in. Do you realize what you did? I stabilized a firm, saved some jobs, kept clients happy. No, Catherine said. You proved that people are the asset. Not processes, not platforms, not the damn branding. You were fired, Diane. They thought you were disposable. And 6 months later, you're sitting at the top of the very system that once threw you out. Diane took a sip of water. I didn't plan any of it. Exactly. That's what makes it more powerful. She didn't respond right away. She thought of Joel, now serving quietly in his 3-year advisory role, humbled but cooperative. Of Miles, who had landed at a much smaller firm in St. Louis, his reputation permanently dimmed. Of the interns who now stopped by her office, not just to deliver documents, but to ask for mentorship. She had never sought revenge. That wasn't her nature. But justice? Justice had a way of finding its way to the patient. Later that evening, as she packed up her briefcase, her eyes landed on an old photo tucked in the corner of her bookshelf. A group shot from 15 years ago, at a client retreat, smiling beside Joel, Catherine, and half a dozen executives, most of whom had since retired. Back then, she was always just to the side of center. Not invisible, but not celebrated either. Now she stood fully in the light. The next morning, a young associate named Caleb knocked on her door. He was nervous, bright, competent, but still green. Ms. Whitmore, do you have a second? Always, she said. Come in. I've been offered a position at another firm, he said, eyes darting. But before I make a decision, I wanted to ask, how do you know when you're in the right place? Diane paused. There were so many ways to answer that question. You know you're in the right place, she said carefully. When the people above you fight for your future instead of fearing your potential. Caleb nodded slowly, visibly processing. Thank you, ma'am. As he left, Diane turned back to her desk. The city stretched out beneath her, like a map of choices made, paths taken, bridges burned and rebuilt. Her phone buzzed. A new client lead, forwarded from Helena Morris. Another door opening. She picked it up, smiled, and got back to work. Because this was never about proving them wrong. It was always about proving, quietly, consistently, and without apology, that she had been right all along. 6 months after the merger, Diane had grown accustomed to her new rhythm, but not complacent. While the title on her business card now read Equity Partner, Head of Client Experience, she still arrived at the office by 7:30 a.m., coffee in hand, her to-do list already scribbled on paper, not typed. Old habits die hard, and some, she believed, shouldn't die at all. Most mornings were filled with planning meetings and client strategy calls, but every Thursday she carved out 2 hours for something she called floor time. No agenda, no slide decks, just walking through departments, checking in, listening. It was during one of these quiet walkthroughs that she passed a familiar face. Thomas, her former assistant at Whitmore Langston. Now a client liaison at Blackwell Franklin, he smiled when he saw her. You've become something of a legend, you know, he said as they walked together. New hires get briefed on the Diane Whitmore principle. She raised an eyebrow. I'm afraid to ask. Simple, he grinned. Client relationships over everything. Never outsource care, never fake connection. Diane laughed softly. I could have used that on a plaque 20 years ago. But behind the lightness, she knew it meant something. The culture had shifted. Not just because of her leadership, but because her values had been allowed to take root. That was a different kind of legacy, one not built on nameplates or corner offices. One afternoon, she received a calendar invite she hadn't expected. Meeting request, Joel Langston. She accepted. They met in a private conference room, overlooking the same skyline they once viewed from opposite sides of power. Joel looked thinner, older, but more at ease. He wore no tie, no mask. "I wanted to thank you," he began, "not for the consulting contract, for the dignity." Diane said nothing, waiting. "I've had time to think," he continued, "about what we built and what we lost. Miles wasn't the problem. He was just the accelerant. The truth is, I stopped listening long before you were pushed out." She nodded, accepting the truth without resentment. We all stop listening when we start measuring value by quarterly returns. Joel looked out the window. "If I'd listened earlier, things might have been different." "Maybe," Diane said. "But then again, I wouldn't be sitting here now." He smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "You were the soul of that firm. They didn't realize they cut the heart out until it stopped beating." She watched him rise, shake her hand, and walk away, this time with no illusions about who held the power. Weeks passed. The firm continued to grow, client portfolios expanded, and Diane's influence deepened. Yet, she never let the success make her smaller by making others feel small. In her quiet moments, she reflected on the irony. She had once been seen as a cost to be eliminated. Now, she was the very reason so many had stayed. Not because she demanded loyalty, but because she earned it. Not because she chased power, but because she respected people. Diane didn't need headlines. She didn't want applause. What she valued couldn't be measured on spreadsheets. Trust, continuity, purpose. And every time another client called, not because they were sold to, but because they felt seen, she knew justice had arrived. Not with fire, but with footsteps. Soft, steady, undeniable. In a world increasingly obsessed with speed, metrics, and youth, Diane Whitmore's journey reminds us that true value lies in experience, trust, and human connection, qualities that cannot be replaced by technology or youthful ambition. Being overlooked, discarded, or underestimated doesn't mean we've lost our worth. It often means the people around us have forgotten how to see it. For those of us entering, or already living through, life's later chapters, her story is a powerful affirmation. Your history matters. The relationships you've built, the values you've lived by, and the quiet integrity with which you've served others. These are not outdated. They are enduring. Sometimes the greatest form of justice is not revenge, but resilience, the ability to rise with grace, to know your worth even when others forget it, and to let time reveal what truly matters. So if you've ever been told you're too old, too expensive, or no longer relevant, remember this. The world may forget, but your legacy will speak through the people whose lives you've touched. And that is something no spreadsheet can measure.